Lisa Nandy and Lucy Powell have spoken out against Twitter, with Nandy removing herself and her entire department off the social media platform. "I've decided to leave this platform and my department will too. A platform originally designed for free speech and expression now favours abuse and misinformation over meaningful debate. It isn't healthy for our democracy or our communities, and I don't want to support it." Meanwhile, Powell attacked the website as toxic.
We saw Lisa Nandy say this week on X that she's going to come off X this week because she thinks it's become a far-right misinformation network under Elon Musk. I know you've got some proposals and ideas about how social media needs to change as well, but just on that, on X, do you think there's a government, do you think that there is a case that the wider government should do the same and withdraw?
Well, look, they're decisions for Lisa and her department, and I think, look, these are trade-offs, aren't they? You know, it's a place that people do go to hear about what you're doing or to get news. So, do you want to remain on that platform? But it is also, you know, a platform that increasingly I find to be quite a toxic and difficult environment. But look, more importantly, we absolutely need to strengthen regulation in the social media space. I've got some proposals for doing that, especially when it comes to election time, where as a broadcaster, Lewis, how much you are restricted and regulated during election periods, who you can have on your show, how you have to be impartial, how you have to share information and facts about different people standing for election and so on. And now the social media space, which is where most people get their news and information and are influenced from, is out with that completely. And I think it's not beyond the wit of man. We've got an elections bill going through the House of Commons at the moment to strengthen that bill so that social media comes under some of the same requirements during an election period as our broadcasters do.
But speaking of media platforms, YouTube recently sent a notification to creators warning about proposed government legislation. UK government is running a public consultation called Watch This Space, a new strategic direction for UK media. The proposals include mandatory changes to how content is discovered on YouTube. This could direct audiences away from your channel. As a UK creator, this directly impacts your future. Digital content discovery works best when driven by user choice, not legal requirements. This is a vital window for you to share your perspective before the consultation closes on 31st of August 2026. The proposed new rules include a mandatory prominence regime. This could require digital platforms like YouTube to prioritise and give a privileged position to traditional broadcasters like the BBC, ITV and Channel 4. In user interfaces and recommendation feeds, potentially pushing your content out of sight. So does this mean that government censorship, I can't say that word, on Google platforms is imminent? We caught up with Media Reform Coalition's Dr. Tom Chivers. Just to start off, what do you make of Lisa Nandy and her department leaving Twitter?
I think it's totally reasonable for people to choose to leave these platforms in protest against widespread abuse, hatred, disinformation that Twitter and its owner Elon Musk actively promote. I think for most people, we're not talking here about getting upset about different opinions or people getting ratioed for saying stupid things and then calling that harassment. I think the reality is that many people, especially women, Muslims, trans people, minority communities, they're openly targeted and harmed by rampant abuse and almost industrialized misinformation online, which all has the effect of shutting people out of taking part in these digital spaces. What's more, everybody suffers from how these platforms demean society and public discourse. So leaving these spaces is basically the only thing that most individuals can do to challenge big tech. My problem here is Lisa Nandy is quite literally one of only a tiny handful of people who has real power to do something serious about these problems and to do something that can benefit everybody. When she says she's leaving Twitter in protest, what is she now going to do about these problems? The people who are harmed most as a result of the abuse of misinformation online are still going to be harmed, whether or not she's there. And sadly, public figures, women, minority groups will still be subject to appalling abuse, whether or not they are on these platforms personally. So really my question is Lisa Nandy going to follow up and act, ideally to transform these broken online spaces into meaningfully public democratic spaces, Or is her leaving Twitter simply a case of wiping her hands of the problem?
What are your thoughts about YouTube's message to creators? They are claiming that we could potentially reach less people than legacy media if the government brings in their proposals.
I think YouTube's message is a masterclass in corporate lobbying, and it's typical of how big tech platforms have, really for the last 20 years, resisted any kind of public accountability or regulation by democratic bodies. And we have to keep in mind how companies like Google and Meta and the others operate. They monetize content made by individuals or professional creators. They keep a vast majority of the revenue for themselves. And then they put together a kind of perverse system of audience algorithms, content recommendations, bad incentives for creators that give the platform power to choose what kind of content makes money or gets seen by audiences. And it's certainly not independent journalists or left media that's ever been on the winning side of this system. What then happens is, as soon as regulators or parliaments try to deal with these massive monopolies and these deeply uneven markets, the giant big tech corporations try to turn their users and their content creators into pawns for their lobbying strategies. After taking the profit from your work, making you jump through hoops to get monetized, putting you under permanent threat of demonetization for the slightest slip up, big tech turns around and says, don't let mean, nasty government ruin the perfect online paradise that we've created. I think it's completely cynical. It's transparent, old-fashioned corporate lobbying. I think what matters for independent media and for left media, those who are trying to build accountable and democratic media, I think we have to be really careful here to not fall into the trap of having to side either with big tech or with self-serving governments. We actually need a collective response to how we can build a system that works for us and doesn't simply give power over to government or to big tech.
How much do Google and other social media platforms censor content?
Well, censorship is commonplace on all the major tech platforms, though for the most part, it's not the kind of heavy-handed, iron fist censorship that we traditionally think of. Big tech censorship is systematic, but it's much less visible or obvious. I think in most cases, really, it could be described as commercial censorship. If your content doesn't attract big audiences for Google to sell to advertisers, then YouTube isn't going to prioritize making your content visible or obvious or discoverable to audiences. So then creators who want to earn a living on these platforms are forced to either earn less, or they have to effectively self-censor or modify their content to match the platform's often very opaque and unpredictable standards for what makes popular content, including the topics or views that they cover. There is also much more direct and overt political censorship on these platforms. We know, for instance, that YouTube, TikTok, Twitter have all suppressed videos and posts by Palestinians and pro-Palestinian groups. We know how evidence or reporting of the genocide in Gaza is flagged or removed for content violations that are never applied in the same way to reporting on Ukraine or other conflicts. We know that Facebook has cooperated directly with authoritarian governments around the world to uphold blasphemy laws or to undermine free speech online. And of course, Meta's recent change to its hateful conduct standards, which gave a green light to anti-LGBT posts and harassment on Facebook, all done to, well, quite openly, to appease the Trump administration. I certainly don't want any government applying direct censorship to determine what we can post or find or say online. But the claim that Google and these big tech platforms, the claim they're making that these online spaces are some kind of utopia where all kinds of views or kinds of content are free and equal, it's completely garbage. Platform censorship is commonplace.
Whilst you seemingly have a big fight between government and big tech, we know that big tech are censorious. They are not the bastion of free speech, yet the government could elevate organisations such as the Daily Mail or the Telegraph, not just public broadcasters such as the BBC. That's a potential major problem, right?
I think it's a huge problem, and what it shows is the deeper political and economic power struggles that are shaping what kind of media system we have in the United Kingdom. This new policy proposal about online prominence shows that the government is starting to discover a will to take on the power of big tech, but at the same time, it's still completely captured by the power of the established, traditional, elite media institutions like the corporate press and the big broadcasters. I think we should be forcing big tech companies to take on public responsibilities. They have a hugely powerful, almost total control over the online media landscape. They make obscene amounts of money off of our attention and our data, but they aren't held to any meaningful standards or required to give anything back to the public. The least we should expect of these online platforms is that they make trustworthy, high quality, independently regulated journalism accessible and visible to the public online for the public's benefit. But as you say, the government seems to think that if we're after trustworthy, high quality news, then we should look no further than the Daily Mail or the Sun or the Telegraph, newspapers that aren't regulated to any kinds of standards, that are owned by unaccountable billionaires, and which pump out disinformation and abuse every single day, just like the tech platforms the government wants to regulate. I think the essential principle in this debate has to be no public benefits without public responsibilities. The government should not be doling out major requirements for any kind of media organisation unless that media organisation has clear public responsibilities. The best independent media, the best local media, the best investigative public interest journalism we have in this country has all made clear commitments to public responsibilities, whether that's high content standards, whether they're publicly owned, whether they're independent cooperatives, independently regulated. That's the kind of trustworthy news we should be requiring the big tech platforms to promote and host. But it really takes a collective action from the independent media sector to tell the government, ignore the press barons, ignore the big tech billionaires. If you want to build a better media, this is the media system and this is the independent sector which is ready and waiting for your support.
Curtis, what are your thoughts about the recent intervention from YouTube and the proposed legislation?
Yeah, so of course, like we saw the notification from YouTube. And like at first it sounded quite alarming, and it could be, because there's so many questions about this green paper. Ultimately, I think the first draft of the green paper was basically like, oh, hey, you, Mr. Big Tech, do the right thing. And it was like, well, you can't ask the big tech to voluntarily be good. And now they're looking at ways of putting prominent media above other people. Now, the big issue potentially of this piece of legislation is that they could be putting like I'm not actually that bothered about like the BBC getting some kind of prominency. Of course, we all have our criticisms of the BBC. What I'm worried about though is they might look at like the Sun and the Daily Mail, and that's just corporate media. But because they have accreditation, then that might be boosted towards us, for example. That worries me. I do think there's a far more nuanced discussion about this, though. The right wing have basically said this is mass censorship from the government. You should be really, really worried. But as Tom Chivers was pointing out, and as we all know, Google, and especially YouTube, is highly censorious because they control the algorithms. Like, look at Twitter, for example. Elon Musk now owns Twitter. Has the algorithm stayed the same under his ownership? No, it hasn't. It's changed, right? And he's made Twitter into his own fascist, disgusting far-right hellhole. So you can have one unaccountable, well, I say billionaire, but like trillionaire for what, a day or two? Unaccountable billionaire, trillionaire to basically rig the media, and that's a big problem. So I do think that social media needs to be regulated. And again, the right wing will cry at that. They'll say you just want big government and censorship. But when it comes to the media, let's not talk about social media for example, but broadcast media, print media, there's already regulation. We have Ofcom. Now, Ofcom is pathetic. I mean, if Ofcom did their job properly, GB News would not be on there, right? It's crazy that they've not been taken off because they just push misinformation, right? But it's a good thing that there is regulation. Like the amount of times where like the Sun newspaper does like a front page lie about someone, and they're forced to retract. Now, again, there should be stronger rules because the Sun will put out a lie, knowing that it's a lie, and then they'll do like a retraction on like page 7 in small writing as an apology. Mm-hmm. They know most people aren't going to see that. That's a problem. But I'm glad that corporate media is held to a certain standard. It just needs to be improved. It seems strange to me that we don't do the same for social media, because would anyone argue that owners of GB News, owners of the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, that they get to pump out anything they want unrestricted? No. I mean, they could, and they have, put people's lives in danger when it comes to saying a story about an ordinary working class person. They could say, this person is the murderer. Could be complete lies. And that could destroy someone's life, because often the lie is the thing that spreads, right? The truth doesn't catch up. So, of course, we have regulations, but it seems wild to me that we don't have it for social media. Like, ultimately, corporate media is also social media. Like I think for a while, a lot of people were excited about social media. We thought it was going to change the landscape. We thought it was going to give people power. We thought it was going to democratize the means of communication. And the internet, at least for a while, was kind of like that. But what's happened? It's just turned into corporate media version 2. And in a worrying way, the so-called new media or right-wing media, which is owned by the billionaire class and like people like Elon Musk, they're saying they're new independent media and they're taking on legacy media. But it's like ultimately there is no difference between someone like Elon Musk and the Telegraph. I would say obviously there is a diversion of extremities, of course, right? But ultimately our mainstream media push a very simple message, which is propaganda on behalf of the financial and economic elite. Okay. That hasn't changed on social media. So I think that's really important to understand. So if we don't have any kind of regulation to say, well, hold on, Google can just censor you, then that is a big problem. And I don't see social media obviously improving in any kind of way. Because ultimately it's about the concentration of power. Now, the right wing, they view, and this is like what libertarians do as well, they think that authoritarianism and censorship can only come from the government. When the state does something, oh, it's bad. But have they not thought about like where power resides? Okay. Power doesn't just reside from the state. It resides in the private market, i.e., it resides with corporations. The difference is, right, some billionaire or trillionaire can own the means of communication, put out the propaganda, and it's not accountable whatsoever. At least like the BBC, and it has their problems. And we've spoken to like Tom Chivers, we've spoken to many other people who want to reform and democratize the BBC, but at least there is some kind of accountability. So what we're saying is, if we don't regulate corporate media and social media, oh, we should just have the BBC and remove any kind of democratic accountability. So there has to be that. And I'm interested in power and where it resides. Okay. Power, transcends state. But again, people on the right seem to think that if the government imposes something, that's authoritarian, but they're happy to be little cucks for the billionaire class and the corporations. Like, no, 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 no. Like, the issue is corporate power, whether it's exercised through the states or whether it's exercised through private media organizations such as social media. So I do want to see regulation on YouTube, because I think we have a big problem with misinformation. There's a huge problem with misinformation, actually. No one knows the truth anymore because ultimately those who've got the money and the power can just pump out slop, right? So if I don't see a problem with the government saying, look, we're going to bolster regulated organizations. Like we're looking at being regulated by Impress. We're not yet, but that's something we're looking towards, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, look, I watched Aaron and Michael Navarro, and I basically had the same opinions as them, really. I found myself agreeing with both of them, which is that, I think actually more Michael this time, though, that, more and more people should be regulated. We're going to get into a position, when we get into a position where we can, we would like to be regulated, and that we're bolstered over some idiot who calls himself a citizen journalist, and they're just harassing people in the street, and they call it journalism. A lot of the far right content that goes out there, like why is young Bob, who's actually favored in the algorithm, over us when we write scripts, we do our research, and we put together a proper show? Young Bob can just go out and say whatever he wants. And because he's ideologically aligned with Elon Musk, well, Elon Musk is going to boost him. So that is so anti-democratic. So don't worry about state censorship, which we all oppose, right? And again, I have worries about this legislation, but no one seems to kick up a fuss about corporate censorship.
I think, yeah, I do agree that there definitely needs to be some more kind of regulation with social media. In particular, more and more people are turning to social media to find out about different news stories and stuff. I don't really know that many people, even my parents, I don't think they physically like read a newspaper anymore. And yeah, sure, they might go on certain newspapers apps and things like that. But I think more and more people are just following different creators online that they resonate with and they like what they say and things like that. But agreed, that's just going to really um cause more issues around misinformation
Yeah.
and the spreading of misinformation, because things really do spread like wildfire on social media. I think because it's so instant and it's at the tips of our fingertips
Well,
constantly.
anyone can put out a lie.
Yeah.
When it comes to like the mainstream media, when it comes to like writing for a publication, you have to fact check. You have
Hmm.
to run it through editors. There's a process, right, where you can't just willingly lie. Social media, you don't have to do that. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has to go through a rigorous process of like sending a tweet, but I do think that like someone who is notorious, known for lying, that maybe they should be capped on the algorithm.
It's really interesting though, because for example, I follow this girl called Grace Beverly. She's the founder of sports brand Tala, as well as lots of other things that she's done. And she has millions of followers on
Mm.
Instagram. And every now and again, she's got a podcast. I think, I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, she's got a podcast. She interviews lots of different business people. She's very left leaning, actually, even though she's in this quite like privileged position. But the other day she put a reel on talking about how dangerous reform and restore are. I think it was restore particularly. And obviously the right wing caught onto it. She's got quite a lot of nasty comments and stuff on it. Um, and she's obviously chosen to make that piece of content. She's chosen to inform herself, educate herself, etc., so she can put this bit of content out. And then somebody commented like, "Oh, I don't see you commenting about the grooming gang
Mm.
report." And although obviously a lot of us can say that that report was bogus,
There's fabricated numbers in it.
100%. And that's obviously why she's not spoke out about it. But there is this kind of weird thing that happens on social media when certain, particularly with influencers, I would say, but when influencers maybe chop and choose what they want to talk about, or I mean,
Mm.
nobody owes anyone anything at the end of the day. It's their channel, they can talk about what they want. But if they're not political, but they do, as in they're not a politics centered page like Grace is, but they do occasionally comment on it, there's this like expectation that you then should
You now have
comment
to
on
speak about
everything.
everything, yeah, yeah, and
Exactly.
people don't have the time or
No.
capacity to do that. I mean, you always kinda get that a little bit, but, like, you actually, like I just sort of thought of something now as you were speaking about how, uh, Rupert Lowe just went on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Hmm.
The Joe Rogan podcast has millions of views. It is massive, and it is pure misinformation slop. Like, Joe Rogan is a fucking imbecile, and, in fact, there was, I think in the 90s in Scotland, Dunblane, there was a mass shooting that happened. 16 children were killed, 1 teacher was killed, and Rupert Lowe, he was basically saying how it's terrible that my gun and my father's gun was taken off me after 1 murder. And he referenced Dunblane. And Joe Rogan was like,
Oh my.
1 murder? And he's like, yeah, just 1 murder. And he didn't go, hey, pull up the information. He didn't. Obviously, it's fucking bullshit. 16 people, 16 children were killed. And like, Joe Rogan never fact checks,
Mm.
but and you get some people all the time. They just push their right wing slop. He doesn't ever, he rarely checks. That doesn't matter.
And the thing is, somebody could hear that, obviously, take that in, hear that as gospel, as the correct information, blah, blah, blah. They'll then go and spread that to somebody else. And even if the next podcast episode he'd issued a apology or a correction or whatever, what if that person doesn't listen to that
Yeah,
next episode?
exactly.
Then that
Yeah.
they just believe that bit of
It's
false
kind of the
information.
same with the newspapers. They might see the front page, might not buy it, but they're not going to buy it to see like page 7. So that's what's so dangerous about social media now, and the lack of democratization of the media just means that the oligarchs own it.